DMX rose to fame during a time that's now considered to be hip-hop's golden era, but long before he was DMX, Earl Simmons was born on December 18th, 1970. His mother was a fanatically strict disciplinarian and Jehovah's Witness, and his father was an extremely talented artist who abandoned the family when DMX was very young and spent the majority of his adult life homeless and living on the streets. And without his father's presence in his life, that meant DMX and his siblings were left to face his mother's wrath on their own, and it seemed like she made it her life's mission to absolutely torment the young DMX on a nearly daily basis. DMX was a frail and often sick child who inherited a case of debilitating asthma from his father, but at the same time he was also extremely intelligent and often did very well in school. However, none of this meant anything to his mother, who took the terms neglect and abuse to an entirely different level. This lack of attention from his mother led to DMX sneaking out of the house late at night and hanging out with older kids on the street. And of course, this would inevitably result in DMX eventually getting into trouble. That's when DMX's mom decided the only way to deal with her now unruly son was to begin relentlessly beating him, which she would do frequently and mercilessly. One day, after breaking her hand on DMX's head, she decided to use whatever else she could get her hands on to punish her son. She used extension cords, belts, frying pans, wooden spoons. One time, after she broke a broomstick while beating him on the back, she got even angrier because she blamed him for the broom breaking, so she continued beating him with both pieces of the broken broomstick. And the torment from his mother wasn't only physical abuse, it was also psychological abuse as well. She would often lock DMX in his bedroom for days on end, refusing to feed or give him any water. The only relief he ever got from his mother was the rare times when he could go visit his grandmother. His grandmother loved DMX tremendously, and to DMX, his grandmother meant the world to him. Eventually, DMX's trouble at home began following him to school, where he would often lash out violently. He frequently insulted his teachers, he would beat up other students, and one time threw an entire desk at the head of a fellow student. The teachers at the school saw DMX as a textbook case of something terrible going on at home, so they got social services to intervene. Social services would come to the conclusion that DMX's mother was unfit to raise him, which resulted in DMX being sent to a boarding school where at first he flourished in the structured environment. Eventually, his terrible behavior continued at the boarding school and got to the point that he burned down an entire building on the campus's property. This, of course, resulted in DMX being kicked out of the boarding school. But the staff at the boarding school recognized just how smart DMX actually was, so they worked hard to get him enrolled in a middle school for exceptional students, but he would end up getting expelled from there after just a few weeks. Seeing no other option for his education, DMX's mom took it upon herself to homeschool her son. But the lessons at home weren't so much about reading and math. Instead, DMX's mom just used this as another opportunity to abuse her son. But at this point, DMX was a little bit older and a little bit stronger, so he started fighting back. And once DMX's mom realized she could no longer stand toe-to-toe with her son, she resorted to attacking him in his sleep. All of this abuse started to take its toll on DMX, so he started quite literally plotting to his own mother. But he would eventually abandon any thought of this because no matter what his mother did to him, he still very much loved her. But the pain and torment he suffered at the hands of his mother would haunt him for the rest of his entire life.
She not once she ever that she ever told me that she loved me.
Eventually, all the trouble at home resulted in DMX spending more and more time alone on the streets. And this is when he started finding companionship in stray dogs, most of which he snuck home with them and hid them on the roof so he could continue taking care of them.
A dog doesn't know how to lie to you. A dog doesn't know how to be fake.
Once DMX's mom discovered all the stray dogs on the roof, she had finally had enough of her son. So she tricked him into going to a group home under the premise that it was just for a visit. But that was all a lie just to get him in the group home, where she of course left him behind. Staff members recalled DMX screaming and crying for his mother as she walked out of the facility. He spent the rest of that entire day alone in his bunk, curled in the fetal position, crying. And whenever staff members would come and check on him, all he would say is, "When is my mom coming back?" Then 6 months later, when it was around Christmas time, all the kids were able to go home and visit with their families. So all the kids lined up and waited outside for their families to come and pick them up. One after the other, every kid was picked up by their families, leaving DMX alone sitting on the sidewalk. His own mother, after abandoning him at this group home, didn't even want to see him at Christmas time. This meant all the other kids at this group home were with their families for Christmas vacation except DMX. But it was also around this time when he was alone that DMX began to rap and beatbox. Then one day, after a staff member randomly overheard DMX beatboxing, he got him to follow him to the recreation room, where he gave him something that would not only forever change the course of DMX's life, but hip-hop history as well. And the object that the staff member handed him was the Oberheim DMX drum machine. So after being abandoned by his mother at a group home, DMX began rapping and beatboxing for the very first time. Then his skills, primarily in beatboxing, would go to an entirely different level after he was given an Oberheim DMX drum machine. Now, believe it or not, when DMX first started rapping, he wasn't exactly very good. However, after using the drum machine for just a few days, he was able to imitate its sounds almost perfectly while beatboxing. And this inevitably resulted in the other kids at the group home giving him the nickname DMX. Then after spending 18 months in this group home, DMX was released into the custody of his mother, but instead of going home, DMX decided he'd rather be spending his time on the streets, where he spent most of his nights sleeping behind dumpsters or inside of empty storage bins. And at this point, DMX was still only in middle school, where yes, he was getting good grades, but he eventually came to the conclusion that good grades were useless because you couldn't eat an A+. So instead, DMX decided to just start spending more and more time on the streets, where he inevitably started using. Now at first it was just weed, then later it was weed laced with, and of course it was this usage of so early on that would become the catalyst for his crippling addiction to later in life.
So he came back with a blunt rolled up. I later found out that he laced the blunt with crack.
Yeah.
He knew I looked up to him, you know what I'm saying? And like, how would you do that to somebody who looks up to you like this? I mean,
it was also at this point in time that DMX befriended a dog named Blackie that he found in a junkyard and began robbing people for the very first time. And this would evolve into DMX going full Omar from The Wire because he started robbing drug dealers for their money. It got to the point that DMX was robbing 3 dealers a day, and half of this was just so he could have some money in his pocket, but the other half was so he could support his already growing addiction. Then after one very unfortunate encounter with the police, his dog Blackie was shot and killed, and DMX was sent to juvenile hall for 2 years. But he escaped not long after and hid out at his grandma's house. After just a few days of hiding out at his grandma's house, of all people, his mom showed up with the police and got him sent back to juvenile hall. Then after spending 2 years in juvenile hall, DMX started spending more and more time around an up-and-coming rapper named Ready Ron. Ready Ron was so impressed by DMX's beatboxing skills that the two started performing shows together, and DMX was going under the name Divine Master of the Unknown, which he would later just shorten to Darkman X. But not long after all this started, DMX was once again arrested, this time for Grand Theft Auto. And it was during his time of incarceration that the older inmates encouraged DMX to get his life together, so he got really serious about rapping, and as soon as he was released, started releasing his own mixtapes, which included him rapping under the style he developed while he was in jail called Spellbound, where DMX would rap out entire words letter by letter.
Spellbound, it ain't hard to tell, you go crazy, when a S-P-E-L-L, you won't catch it, I match it, but once you see how much it heats up the crowd, you'll reach but won't touch it, so as I'm the DMX, the rhymes are D-O-P-E, code D-A-M-A-G-E-N-E-E-M-C-E-E.
These mixtapes started getting DMX's name a lot of buzz in the streets of New York, and in 1991 he was invited to the Stretch and Bobbito show where he kicked a now classic freestyle.
It's the X, the next to flex, I just Rex, give me that sex, disrespect, all that attempt to approach, school them like an old football coach, rule them, cause I think they need the supervision, strictly by a knockout, no need for a decision.
DMX's appearance on Stretch and Bobbito only boosted his profile. Then the Source magazine featured DMX in their unsigned hype column, which only added to his growing popularity. And all this new attention led to major record labels showing a tremendous interest in DMX. So he joined the Rough Riders management team, which led to a major record deal with Columbia Records.
Times are hard in the ghetto, I still for a living, eating turkey flavored now latest, but Thanksgiving.
However, DMX's deal with Columbia Records was short-lived because they thought the budget for him would be better used on Crisscross. I shit you not, Columbia Records dropped DMX in favor of Crisscross. And keep in mind, this is the same Columbia Records that would later also drop 50 Cent.
But that's none of my business, sir.
Then after DMX was dropped from Columbia, he met with Diddy at Bad Boy Records, but Diddy decided not to sign him because he said he thought his voice was too rough. It was probably more related to the fact that Diddy realized he couldn't bend that over.
That's not none of my business.
DMX even met with Suge Knight to sign with Death Row East, but even that deal fell apart. Then after years of trying to find a record label, DMX would finally sign with Def Jam in 1997. And as a way to get DMX's name out there to a larger audience, he began doing features with more established artists.
24 left until my death, so I'm gonna waste a lot of lives, but I'll cherish every breath. I know exactly where I'm going, but I'ma send you there first. And with the shit that I'll be doing, I'ma send you there worse. Leave what I say when I tell you. Don't make me put you somewhere where nobody can smell you.
That same exact time, DMX was working on his own debut album, It's Dark and Hell Is Hot, which would be released in February 1998.
Stop, drop, shut them down, open up shop.
And after DMX released his album, it absolutely exploded in popularity. It's Dark and Hell Is Hot would debut at #1 and eventually go 6 times platinum, but DMX was still not finished. In that same year of 1998, DMX would also release his second album, Flesh of My Flesh, Blood of My Blood, which would also debut at #1.
Hey yo, I'm slipped, I'm falling, I can't get up. Hey yo, I'm slipped, I'm falling, I can't get up.
DMX became the first rapper ever to release 2 #1 albums in the same year, which was an accomplishment that would stand for over 20 years. Then just 1 year later in 1999, DMX would release his third album, And Then There Was X, which would also debut at #1 and end up going 6 times platinum. Hip-hop had never seen anything quite like DMX. Over the span of just 2 years, he had gone from being flat broke to having 3 #1 albums, millions of dollars, and became one of the most famous people on the planet. But at the same time, all the trauma DMX had suffered as a child was still very much a part of his life, and now that he had millions of dollars at his disposal, he spiraled into his addiction at a feverish pace. When he was performing on stage, all the world ever saw was DMX, but he was still very much Earl Simmons, the traumatized, frightened, frail and sickly child who desperately wanted his mother's love, but all he got instead was just torment and abuse from the same person who brought him onto this earth.
Father God, I am just learning how to pray. Bear with me. Then I thank you for the love you give me. Why? I don't know. I don't deserve it, and it hurts inside. Many a nights I cried and called your name out loud, but didn't call you when I was doing good, too proud. And still you gave me love. I wasn't used to that. Most of the people that gave me love ended up taking it back. You gave me a love most of my life I didn't know was there. I give you my life, because you cared.